Lucifer means Lightbringer presents Between Two Weirwoods live panel discussion. Today's topic, being parented in Westeros, featuring Glass Table Girl, the Queen of Love and Booty, Crowfood's daughter, and your host, Lucifer means Lightbringer.
Okay, I believe that was a moderately successful playing of the introductory video, but you'll have to tell me in the crowd how that went. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me on Between Two Weirwoods. I am super fired up for this episode, as I hope all of you are. The topic today is being parented in Westeros, and I have an amazing cast of folks here, and I will introduce them in turn and let them introduce themselves. Why don't you go first? Crowfood's daughter.
So my name's Amanda. I go by Crowfood's daughter. I have a YouTube channel called The Disputed Lands, where I do things mostly geared towards the Ironborn and Ironborn culture. I've been an active member of the fandom for about 4 years now, and I'm just having an amazing time. You can find me on Twitter at crowfood_SD, and yeah.
All right, and of course I have the two lovely Canon ladies of Girls Gone Canon, Chloe and Eliana. I'll let you guys just sort of introduce yourself together or do your sort of chemistry thing that you do there.
Oh, this is fun. Hey guys, I'm Chloe. You can find me on Twitter as @LizenArbor or on Tumblr at lizenarbor.tumblr.com. And I am also one half of Girls Gone Canon, the half empty. She's the half full. She's the best. And I write a bunch of meta and theories, and I tweet a lot of shit posting, and we make podcasts.
Hello, I'm the other half of, oh my god, I'm gesturing like at this thing behind me. I'm the other half of Girls Gone Canon, Eliana. You probably know me as Glass Table Girl over on the Maester Monthly podcast, which talks about the things that go on in the A Song of Ice and Fire subreddit, where that's also my username. And Glass Table Girl over on the Maester Monthly podcast. Am I hearing it? Anyways, so thank you for having me here today, David. What's up?
Woo! Yes, this is going to be a fun one. I'm looking forward to it a lot, and of course, parenting or being parented sounds like a sort of a wide topic, but specifically what we're talking about is the way that George Martin considers parent-child relationships when he creates his characters. So Between Two Weirwoods is a very meta kind of podcast. I like to talk about just the writing techniques, because I feel like fully a third to maybe a half of us in the fandom are writers on some level. And if we're not writers, we're avid readers. And so it's very interesting to talk about what makes the books tick, what makes George R. R. Martin great. And so the topic today is going to be specifically focusing on the way that Martin uses every character's parents, their childhood traumas to sort of shape and inform who they are. And it's one of the things that makes his characters very relatable and compelling. And it's one of the ways that he makes his, quote, bad guys and psychopath figures a little more interesting. Like we're going to talk about Cersei and people like that who end up going down the wrong path and how that happened. She's not just a crazy bitch that drinks too much. Like there's things that, she was abused by Robert, and well, we're going to get into all that. But that is the topic today. But before we get to that, one thing that I like to do on Between Two Weirwoods is I like to ask all my guests an opening question, which is what makes George R. R. Martin great? Meaning, name one thing that you like about his writing that you find compelling, that maybe he does better than other writers, that really jumps out to you. And Amanda, I'll let you go first.
So the thing that I really appreciate about George, and I think you already know this, is I'm a huge fan of mythology, and George does an amazing job he's able to weave in his mythology throughout his series. He's able to do it in a very subtle way, and he is able to weave it into his story. And I really like the way that you're able to really stage that in your podcast and show everybody exactly what George is doing with that. I've been reading mythology ever since I was a little girl, and I actually have a funny story about, you probably heard this. When I was in junior high, my English teacher had a parent-teacher conference with my parents, and she gave them an ultimatum and said that I either needed to read something other than mythology or find another English teacher. And my parents were, you know, how they shaped all of this.
Guffaw loudly over that. That's hilarious. Go on.
Yes. So my parents let me switch English teachers. If I would have expanded my horizons, I might not actually be here today, because I still love mythology, and it's one of the things that I think George does with. So yeah.
Well, I like that answer. You know that. And yeah, everyone, the chat is lighting up with bad teacher, bad teacher. Yeah, that's tough. You know, some people just don't understand mythology as anything other than like crusty old funny stories from a long time ago. And obviously that's something that, you know, George is trying to change people's minds about. And it's something I try to change people's minds about. And of course, all of you who have checked out Crowfood's daughter's videos know that she's very much going down that same, you know, barking up the same tree, checking out the myths and looking at the symbolism. And she just did a video about, well, of course, about what else? The Grey King. I have to say, I liked your take on the sea dragon, because as we all know, when he does myths, he gives us those more fantastical, metaphorical meanings, but he always gives you the sort of plausible explanation too. Like, well, what's a sea dragon that rose from the waters? Well, it's actually just a boat with a dragon prow that, you know, maybe crash landed on Wick, and now we have the Weirwood boat hull ribs that, you know, are now Naga's ribs. And so we have this story about the Grey King slaying the sea dragon, and they both come from the sea. And you're like, well, one explanation could be that this incredible foreigner who came to the Iron Islands and brought all this technology and knowledge that they didn't have, you know, was looked at as a god, and his giant ship that they had no name or description for became a sea dragon, you know, over 10,000 years of myth. So I thought that was a really great sort of base level, like practical explanation. And Martin always gives you all those, because that's how real mythology is. There's, you know, the flood myths on one level are talking about the meltdown of the ice sheets and stuff, but they're also talking about, you know, societal values of their society. Like, well, why did the flood come? It was because God was angry for specific sins. And so now the story imparts morals and a worldview and all this stuff. So mythology is very layered, and George does a great job at that. So I love that answer. Chloe, I'll kick it to you next.
Hey, that's a great answer. The mythology is really strong, which obviously, not to suck up, we illustrate that with your essays and a lot of your live streams and panels. I love the mythology. I think my favorite thing is probably the why of the character. Something I always put like in rubric against when I'm doing essays or writing something is, why would the character do that? What's their motivation? And George tends to kind of depict that really well for characters. You get a really good sense through point of view and through just the way they think and why they think it and when they think it, that leads to those kind of things. And it's interesting to look at the background, like we're doing today a lot with some of these parent and child relationships.
Yeah, it makes sense that you would say that, because a little behind the curtain talk, guys. I started an outline for this episode. I put a few things down and I kicked it out to the ladies and said, hey, go ahead and, you know, add some stuff in. And I check in the next day and there's like 5 pages of brilliance. And I'm just like, oh, great. This is going to be awesome. I'm just going to stand back and let the magic happen. So yeah, this topic is definitely right up your alley, Chloe. So I'm looking forward to what you have to say here. Woo. All right, Eliana, what makes George Martin great to you?
I feel like everyone said all the things that I was going to say. It's somewhere in between all of those things, right? It's that he's able to pull so many things together. He's holding this entire like stage, right? Because the magic of a story happens in that it is ultimately an act of artifice, and he's juggling all these different parts to weave something that moves people. And ultimately, at the end of the day, like, some of these stories we know by heart because they come from these myths, or we've seen them already in like so many movies and TV shows, but like how can you do it again and again to just make people feel something and to like see yourself in these characters and be like, maybe I wouldn't make those choices, but at the same time I understand that people are like that. And I think that's something that I really love about how George pulls this entire world together.
Nice. The chat is expressing skepticism that I'm going to stand back and let everyone else talk, but we'll see how that goes. But yeah, no, that's a good answer. That's the the tapestry sort of dynamic of George. Yeah, we definitely talked about that a little bit at Con of Thrones when we addressed this topic. Gemma from Secrets of the Citadel was bringing up the tapestry sort of dynamic, the way that he combines so many things. It's truly staggering. It's one of the things I try to impart to people. You know, it's just like, I'm only taking this one angle on it, and other people will look for the Arthurian myth, and other people are experts on medieval history, and other people know the Marvel comics really well, and everybody sees these different things in the story and digs it out. So anyways, all right, so good answers, everyone. That is a fun question. So I put in here in the introductions that I thought, you know, maybe everyone could tell just a little bit of a story about their involvement in the fandom. It doesn't have to be too long, but the Girls Gone Canon podcast is really interesting from a format point of view, just the way that you guys chose to do character rereads instead of chapter rereads. So I don't know, you could say what you want about the way your podcast started, but give me something on that.
Honestly, I'm just surprised that no one has done it before. Like, I've heard a lot of people saying that they are doing a character POV read through, and that, especially when people are doing an analysis on like a specific character and writing that essay, that's how people tend to read through these chapters anyway, especially when you're trying to get like all of these details. So to start that all off, yeah, I was just surprised that this didn't already exist.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying there, because that is exactly what we do. I tend to either reread characters or a location. Like I'll read all the scenes at the Eyrie when I'm thinking about the Eyrie or something like that. So yeah, Girls Gone Canon has been a very nice addition to the podcast community. So I just want to at least take a minute to say that.
Aw, thanks, man. Yeah, we've been having a really good time with it. I like to read that way because, spoiler alert, it lets you isolate the character motivations more, start to get into the character's head, start to really continue, like, there's more consistency when you remember, well, last chapter, this character dreamed about this, and now this next chapter is the next thing we get from their brain, and this is how they're feeling since then. So there's a nice connection there. Eliana and I have been friends, I want to say, since 2015. We just were acquaintances on Twitter and on the internet and blogging. And now we've met in we met 2016 Ice and Fire Con, I think, I want to say. We got to meet in real life. And we've seen each other there every year, and I'm moving closer to her soon. So it's going to be IRL Girls Gone Canon.
Looking forward to that. So you met Chloe in 2016, and then at 2017 Ice and Fire Con, you met someone else of significance, did you not?
I don't know what you're talking about, first off.
Cool.
I've never met anyone in my life.
All right, cool.
I met my boyfriend there, who's a person.
Yep, he's a person with a podcast.
Yeah.
So you guys might know him.
He's also moving closer to his podcast husband. So, spoiler alert, we're both moving towards there. So that's fun. It'll be fun. We're going to have a lot more content in 2018 and 2019 than before, for sure.
Hey, so somebody has a little bit of double echo happening. Amanda, I think it might be you, judging from who's muted and who's not. Can you double check that you don't have the YouTube video up and playing in a window somewhere? If you do, just mute it or pause it. And I think that'll be, yeah. So, alrighty. Well, that takes care of actually, no, Crowfoods, I guess I'll give you a chance. Why don't you give me a little background, because your story is interesting. You know, we became friends maybe like 3 years ago when I first started posting on Westeros.org. In fact, I think you were the first person I ever Skyped with to sort of nerd out about this stuff after reading something you had done. And then you sort of dropped off the map for a couple of years. I guess what were you doing? Parenting? And then you sort of popped back up?
I went to graduate school, so that took most of my time. for a while. So I completely dropped off the map. Same thing that Painkiller Jane is kind of going through at the moment right now as well. So yeah, it took a lot out of me to get that done. But after I graduated, I was back in the forums and having a good time. I think that I read The World of Ice and Fire every, a different like chapter every night before I went to bed during graduate school, just to kind of help with my insomnia. So, but yeah, we kind of touched base right around, I think it was 2014, right around the time that The World of Ice and Fire had been published, because we were looking at a lot of stuff with Garth the Green Hand and some of the Merling myths and the Merling legends, because that's just spoiler alert, I love mermaids. So we kind of talked about that for a while. I think I used the Little Mermaid for my avatar for probably about 2 or 3 years. But yeah, so it was great. We got to finally meet at Con of Thrones this year. It was great. And yeah, it's just my whole fandom experience has just been so much fun. So
I've had a couple people ask me, Amanda, if you're going to start a Patreon, or if this is something you're going to, try to blow up. Because I know you are a parent. You are the parent ringer on this panel. You have kids. You got a pretty busy work schedule. How far do you plan on taking this project?
Yeah, so this is more of a hobby, and I don't have any plans at this moment to do any Patreon. I'm at the point in my life where I'm just working and taking care of my kids, and I really don't have a need for a Patreon or that type of a format at this stage in my life. So I do encourage anybody, if you have a creator that you enjoy. I think Joe Magician, he just started a Patreon. Check that out. There's plenty of different creators that actually do have a Patreon. And if you're looking at supporting your creators, please do so. But at this juncture, I don't have any plans for a Patreon. So
cool. So it's 100% passion and fun. That's awesome. So guys, if you want to support Crowfood's daughter, just share those excellent videos around so everybody can get a grip from them. And thanks for the word of support. Of course, Girls Gone Canon just did start a Patreon, right?
We are starting it soon. Not yet. Not yet. It's soon though. Soon. We're trying to get through a couple more POVs, just get a few down, and then we've got some really fun things up our sleeves. Eliana, you want to spoil, hint at any?
Ooh.
Nothing's been chosen, but there's ideas.
So ideas include friendship bracelets, glitter tattoos, temporary tattoos,
early access also, and stuff like the boring stuff, but we're talking the fun stuff. The fun stuff.
Talking friendship bracelets.
There's been discussion of the top tier getting a t-shirt that may or may not have a burb on it and may or may not say get a job on it. So I'm just saying that's been thrown around.
These are ideas.
I know of a certain artist who is known to whip up a clever t-shirt on occasion. Might be available.
I've heard of her. I've heard actually a lot about this girl.
Yes, that is, of course, the Hand of the Dragon, Sanrixian.
Yes.
I had to bestow titles on her before someone else did. That was my strategy. And, there's actually, this gives me a good excuse to make an announcement. So I had the idea to give my highest paying patrons t-shirts at the beginning. And I made a little bit of a botch of it because I didn't realize I was signing myself up to become a shipping station, which is not the kind of thing that I'm good at. And I still owe about 10 or 15 people t-shirts, and I got a lot more people that want t-shirts. And so Sanri has come to the rescue, and I'm going to be, she just opened her t-shirt store, of course, which I believe is sanrixian.com. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's it. And so we're going to be selling mythical astronomy related t-shirts through the Sanrixian store pretty soon. And you'll be able to get those. And of course, for those 10 or 15 of you who are like, damn you, Lucifer, where's my t-shirt? I have your names, I have your addresses, and we will get you shirts. So there we go. All right. I think that is all the housekeeping. Let's dive into this topic. So, to state the topic, I'm going to use a quote from A Storm of Swords from Tyrion. And he says, "It all goes back and back," Tyrion thought, "to our mothers and fathers and theirs before them. We are puppets, dancing on the strings of those who came before us. And one day our own children will take up our strings and dance in our steads." And there really couldn't be a more perfect encapsulation of the dynamic that we're trying to touch on today. Nobody exists in a vacuum. Just the way that George R. R. Martin's story doesn't exist in a historical vacuum. He considers himself to be, carrying on the tradition of all the ancients before him and inspiring the people who come after him. It's the same dynamic with his characters. They don't exist in a vacuum. They're children of their parents with children of their own. And that's what we're going to be diving into today. I really don't think you can even write a good character without taking into account their relationships with their family, their childhood experiences. Because, aren't we all just like sacks of broken people, like crying about our childhood dramas and stuff, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And by the way,
Amanda earlier before this cast.
This
In the very
isn't-
beginning, LML earlier.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, before the show, I was actually crying about my childhood dramas to everyone. Yeah, totally. So, and just by the way, Canon ladies, I see y'all are very polite and you're muting your microphones when other people are talking. This is a sort of an interactive show, so if you want to jump in, laugh, whatever, like, feel free to go at it, because I'll just talk and talk. You guys got to interrupt me sometimes, just to set that out there.
Will do. I just have background noise, so.
Yeah, same. I live in an apartment.
All right, cool. Well, it's not too bad right now. So, and quite frankly, with the noise that comes through in Emmett's microphone on Nauticast is just obscene. So, nobody's coming close to that, no matter what.
Which that's changing in the next 2 weeks. Just saying. Just so you know, spoiler alert. You didn't hear it from me, but since Nauticast likes to spoil Girls Gone Canon things, Emmett's audio will be fixed. It's like a positive spoiler. It's not even really a spoiler. God dang it. That's not fair.
We've all been putting up with the substandard audio because he is so smart and the things that he has to say are so worth listening to. But
I know. I hate him.
At the same time, you got to take him down a peg so his head doesn't get too swole. So yeah, fix your damn microphone. Anyways, some of the most important characters in our story are dead, and Ned is probably chief among them. And of course, Girls Gone Canon has spent their first 8 episodes or so doing a deep dive on Ned and all his chapters. And one of the things that jumps out to you about Ned, or jumps out to everyone about Ned, is that his death very much paves the way for everything else to happen. His children start growing up and filling various voids and having to do their own thing, which never would have happened without Ned. George sort of tricks you into thinking that Ned is the main character, and he sort of is for the first book. And then he dies, and you're trying to figure out what the fuck's going on. But now 5 books later, looking back on it, you can see that there's no way it could have been any other way. And you mentioned on your Ned wrap-up episode that the one, even in the very earliest outlines, Ned's death was in there. It was always something that was going to happen. So let me turn it over to you two to just sort of share with us some of the reflections that you've had based on your deep dive of Ned in a general sense.
Ned is kind of like this big paragon of virtue of the family. You start the story and you're really brought into that Stark loyalty. I say that I'm not a shill. I'm not a Stark shill. Don't look at me, you guys. I'm not a Stark shill, but just block it. But yeah, he just starts off like he is dad. Dad, no, as everyone is yelling right now in the chat. He is the dad. He is, and he, as when his story dies, that honor and justice that he brought to the story, he transcends it to his children, and all of his children have something from him.
Absolutely. In fact, the very first quote that we see Ned is, "We see him as a father," and it's from Bran's POV. Oh, thanks, Windows. Thanks, Windows. Virus notification. I'm sure it's pressing. So this is from a Game of Thrones very first Bran chapter. "So deep in thought was he that he never heard the rest of the party until his father moved up to ride beside him. 'Are you well, Bran?' he asked, not unkindly. 'Yes, father,' Bran told him. He looked up. Wrapped in his furs and leathers, mounted on his great war horse, his lord father loomed over him like a giant. Robb says the man died bravely, but Jon says he was afraid. 'What do you think?' his father asked. Bran thought about it. 'Can a man still be brave if he's afraid?' 'That is the only time a man can be brave,' his father told him. 'Do you understand why I did it?' He was a wildling, Bran said. They carry off women and sell them to the others. His lord father smiled. Old Nan has been telling you stories again. In truth, the man was an oathbreaker, a deserter from the Night's Watch. No man is more dangerous. The deserter knows his life is forfeit if he's taken, so he will not flinch from any crime, no matter how vile. But you mistake me. The question was not why the man had to die, but why I must do it. Bran had no answer for that. King Robert has a headsman, he said uncertainly. He does, his father admitted, as did the Targaryen kings before him, yet our way is the older way. The blood of the first men still flows in the veins of the Starks, and we hold to the belief that the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. If you would take a man's life, you owe it to him to look into his eyes and hear his final words. And if you cannot bear to do that, then perhaps the man does not deserve to die. So this is our introduction to Ned, and he's basically teaching his son a lesson. And that's the first way that we see him.
Yes, what I love actually about this passage, and I've really thought about it, is that Ned isn't immediately telling Bran what to think. He asks his children questions and he says, "What do you think? Why do you think I did it?" And in that way is sort of cultivating this idea of helping them form their own opinions and thinking critically about things before he explains. He gives reasons behind why things are happening to Bran, but he's not always consistent, as we're going to go into later in this episode. I think that, like, in many ways, it's super apt that we're coming at this discussion from the angle of being parented, as, like, you know, the title, because when we talk about George R. Martin, the fact of the matter is, like, yeah, he wrote all these, and George isn't a parent. Like, he has no kids, and to be honest, like, Ned's chapters, they give us, like, insight on who he is and his own problems that he's wrestling with, but we don't actually often see him thinking about, like, consciously how I'm going to approach my kids, talking about how he's parenting them. We, in this quote, you know, first see him, like, in Bran 1, he's like a father, and then we see that there's another side to him as Lord Stark. We only get him, like, sorting out Arya and Sansa's quarrels, being a father, you know, laying down those rules in their point of view chapters, not in Ned's. And I mean, Kat's a little different. Kat is very much an exploration of motherhood in some ways, but in regards to, like, how we see Ned or fatherhood in general in A Song of Ice and Fire, it tends to be, like, from the perspective of their children, not necessarily from the perspective of the parents. Like, we're going to go into Tywin later, and, like, Tywin doesn't have a POV. So George R. R. Martin is very much drawing on his own experiences of being parented.
Wow, I'm seeing some Ned is a horrible parent rage.
Yeah, I'm getting a little angry. I'm like, whoa, settle down.
Jump on it,
guys.
Go for it. Jump on it.
Well, so I understand, because I am a big Ned, like, not hater, but a big Ned, like, critic. I am a big critic of him because he did so much wrong. But I think, which a lot of what Eliana and I have mentioned in the past, is, like, his trauma. Everything he does hinges so hard on the trauma he's experienced, from losing his sister, from keeping these kids in Winterfell, from not warding them out, from not betrothing them. I mean, he was very afraid that what happens when you betroth the Stark. Bad things happen, apparently. Like, this is obviously history just happened. So I think if you look at it in the scope of Ned, and reading all 15 of his chapters in a row are kind of one of those things, like, it really helps bring it out that everything he does is with protecting the children in mind, being too honorable and trying to save Cersei and her kids and saying, look, just go into exile. I'm trying to help you. I mean, in the end, that would have been nicer than what will happen to Cersei and her kids. But Ned's mercy and his honor is so important. And yes, he's flawed, but what parent isn't flawed? No parent is going to be perfect. And I think that's a big nuance we need to look at in this. And not every parent is the same, and not every situation is the same.
So one thing that I really liked about this quote and about this scene is we have to actually take a look at how old Bran is. This is his actual first time getting to go and witness this. At this point, Bran is still 7 years old. And I don't know what you all were doing at 7 years old. I, for one, was not witnessing any beheadings. And the great thing that Ned does in this scene is he kind of explains and rationalizes, and he's able to get that dialogue with his son to be able to rationalize it in his juvenile mind. Because, for example, Joffrey, his father uses a headsman, and he may actually be a witness to some of this justice that happens over in King's Landing, but he may not actually be getting these conversations with his father where he's rationalizing it and he's understanding things like justice and mercy that you're discussing. One of the roles that we have as parents is giving our children the tools they need to become successful adults. And that's one of the things that I don't think Robert and Cersei did with Joffrey. And this is a really good example of Ned providing that dialogue and those tools and that understanding so that he's able to rationalize everything and take it in, even at a very, very young age, so that he's able to kind of be exposed to that, but still somewhat retain his understanding and also his innocence. And so that's one of the things that I really liked about this scene, because if Ned were to just take him to this beheading and have his son witness this and not allow him to fully understand and grasp what he's actually seeing, that can lead to a lot of misunderstandings about what his role is going to be when he grows up. So that's one of the things that I really liked about this scene.
Yeah, great points all. And I think that we just, of course, we have to just sort of say as a caveat, like the North is kind of a barbaric place. I mean, obviously, in today's modern society, we would consider it inappropriate to behead people in front of 7-year-olds. There's no question about that. But at the same time, in the culture of the North, this is the duty of the Lord, is to perform justice directly. And the moral that's being imparted here at the end is super important. He's like, you have to do it yourself, because otherwise it's possible for you to divorce the ownership of it. And then it gets to the point where you just easily execute people willy-nilly instead of actually taking ownership of the decision. And it's a heavy decision. I mean, to sentence somebody to death. And the point that Ned's making is like, you got to take it seriously. So in any case, let's go see. What do we got? I guess we'll get into. Okay, so you were saying something about. You had a note about Barristan being sort of a living legend and the way that Ned appears to his children and some of the similarities there. You want to expand on that? Either of you?
Oh, yeah. And I know this kind of was something that came off of something Eliana was talking about with her feelings on the parenting between Kat and Ned. But it's interesting because we just started doing Barristan as a point of view. And it's a big contrast of what they are legends for and what they stand for, and that they both kind of fight for the same team, however, for different reasons. And Barristan's is kind of an empty honor, where Ned's is his sort of honor. And as we get into it, I mean, Ned acts on his honor and Barristan holds out as long as he can. But Ned is such a role model to all of these kids. In our read through, Eliana mentioned something interesting, especially regarding this Bran passage, that Bran and Robb and them, Bran's first beheading was this moment. And the first beheading that Sansa and Arya saw was their father's. And that kind of shook me. That was like, man, that first justice bringing comes from seeing their own dad die. And from there on out, it just like Sansa says, is it all lies forever and ever?
Yes, basically. I think of that line in King's Landing where it's like, take a look around. Everyone here is a liar, and they're all better than you. It's like, yes, pretty much. It is all lies. And we'll get into Sansa in more detail, but it's definitely interesting how she's given these examples from her natural parents, and then she's given people like Cersei and Littlefinger that are sort of teaching different kinds of lessons. But we'll get into that. In fact, I guess let's go ahead and turn it to the children of the Ned, and we'll take a look at each of their kids, sort of talk about the influences. Because like we said, the whole important thing about Ned is not even Ned himself, but the way that all of his kids are acting as the story goes forward, because the story is going to be decided by Jon and Sansa and Bran. So their decision-making process is going to be reflective of their relationship and what they've learned from their experience. So before we do that, general points about Ned here. Chloe, you want to read this?
I do. I can do that. I can do that. I'm capable. I do think, and I know there's a lot of talk right now in chat about it, I do think that Ned sheltered his children, and it's something that we'll come back to when we get talking more about Sansa's relationship with Ned. But look at the Tyrells, for example, when they came to court, seriously only, 1 to 2 years each older than the Stark kids. You know, the Tyrell family is very well versed in court. Marjorie, obviously, we don't have a POV of her, but from what we can tell, she seems pretty clever, especially during A Feast for Crows with Cersei. And Ned definitely sheltered his kids. Sansa is the first betrothal made in the family at age 11. And he doesn't betroth his kids out. We hear from other people in the story. Alice Karstark says to Jon, you know, my father was hoping I would marry Robb. You know, I danced with him one time, but that hasn't happened, and here I am. I mean, we hear from different characters, just like how the Starks do what they do. And especially when Ned, who didn't want to be the leader, didn't want to be Brandon, didn't want to be Rickard, didn't want to take his kids and make advantageous matches with them. He definitely sheltered them. He kept them there. None of the boys went out as a ward, and that was seen very much so in Sansa and Bran and Arya and Robb, and not as much in Rickon, obviously, but they don't learn much about the world until his death sets them free. His death is what allows their plot and this plot to progress.
Yeah, you get the feeling that like he went north after the Roberts Rebellion and was just like, I'm out. Like, I'm just going to try to stay away from all this and hope that it never comes and touches me. And in one sense, that left him vulnerable to Littlefinger's maneuver that lured him out of King's Landing and to his doom, is because he didn't even have any spies in King's Landing. He didn't bother to pay anybody to go down there and hang out and sort of just keep an ear to the wind and figure out what was going on. He just tried to forget it all existed and just stay home in the north, and he thought that that would keep everyone safe. And probably Jon's secret played into that too, right? You know, trying to hide Jon's Targaryen nature. So yeah, that's definitely a good point. There was some sheltering that happened, and then all of a sudden everyone's forced to go out and deal with the world. And Sansa obviously is the most startling example of being unprepared and then dealing with the most awful part of medieval courtly life or whatever.
Yeah, and being very alone in it. Very alone.
So we'll start with Robb here, because Robb, I think we can get through pretty quick. It's fairly basic. Robb is essentially thrust into his father's role too soon. And in that, he very much mirrors Ned, who was essentially not planning to be the new Lord of Winterfell. And all of a sudden, Brandon died. And, you know, he says it was all meant for Brandon. And all of a sudden, he had to literally marry the woman that Brandon was going to marry. And all of a sudden, he's the Lord. And he hadn't been expecting to do that. And even though Robb is raised as the firstborn, the dynamic is similar because he's not expecting his father to die when he's only 14 or 15. And then all of a sudden, he's got to change into Robb the Lord. And Bran observes this several times. It says, only Robb and baby Rickon were still here, and Robb was changed. He was Robb the Lord now, or trying to be. He wore a real sword and never smiled. His days were spent drilling the guard and practicing his sword play, making the yard ring with the sound of steel. As Bran watched forlornly from his window. At night, he closeted himself with Maester Luwin, talking or going over account books. Sometimes he would ride out with Hallis Mullen and be gone for days at a time, visiting distant holdfasts. Whenever he was away more than a day, Rickon would cry and ask Bran if Robb was ever coming back. Even when he was at home in Winterfell, Robb the Lord seemed to have more time for Hallis Mullen and Theon Greyjoy than he ever did for his brothers.
I think that something that's interesting about how Robb ends up thrust again, like into his father's role, is that you see him, even though we don't get his point of view, though George R. R. Martin says that he would have liked to put in a Robb POV if he had to do it all over again, is that he's drawing so much from his memory of like what Ned would do in each situation and just trying to emulate him because that's the example that he has. And thankfully, I guess, you know, if Ned started Bran at age 7, Robb does have quite a few years to draw from, but we're also like at this part where Robb's like 15 or 16, right? And he as well as his siblings, have this very, like, Robb and Jon especially have this very, I want to say, idealized version of Ned. And it's because we're not just like at any age, right? We are at this age where all of the kids are young enough that like mom and dad are still like perfect. You know, you don't understand that mom and dad are humans with flaws yet. Like maybe you can kind of see it sometimes, but you don't really get it because you're just so young and you don't have experience with the rest of the world. And so at every step, they're trying to think of like, this is how Ned would do this. And sometimes it leads into some mistakes, as opposed to necessarily them understanding maybe how they want to do it first, of this is how I think I should handle the situation based on my experiences and opinions. And it's hard. It's being a teenager is hard.
That's a great point. I think that Sansa is going to be the one who's really going to have to grasp with the idea that her parents weren't perfect and they made mistakes. She's also got to see through, you know, Peter Baelish's rhetoric. We still don't know how much like Sansa even processed everything that Lysa was blurting out before she got tossed out of the moon door. And there we go, talking about Sansa again. There's really, it's one of the most interesting people.
I wrote 5 pages about it. I was like,
so yeah, totally. I mean, there's just a lot going on there. Like I said, Robb is pretty straightforward. You can see what's going on here. This is, and it's an important story to tell because in medieval times, you know, a lot of people were thrust into leadership at a young age. And I really thought that the scene where Robb is trying to command all his commanders and the Great John, you know, gets up and starts storming and Robb has his wolf bite his finger off and stuff, like that's really well written chapter showing like how hard it is to rule people, even though they all are loyal to the Starks and they all respect Ned and stuff. Robb's just a 14-year-old kid and he's got to prove himself and they're all going to try to push for their advantage. So I thought that was a really cool dynamic to see Robb navigate, and Robb does pretty well. Of course, it helps to have a direwolf. You feel a little more of a badass if you got a direwolf sitting around, right? But let's see here. Here's another good Robb the Lord moment. This is in a Game of Thrones when they get the news about Robb or about Ned being thrown in jail. Bran, that's not the worst of it. Father was caught beneath a falling horse in the fight. Alan said his leg was shattered, and Maester Pycelle has given him the milk of the poppy, but they aren't sure when the sound of hoofbeats made him glance down the road to where Theon and the others were coming up. When will he wake? Robb finished. When he will wake, Robb finished. Then he laid his hand on the pommel of his sword and went on in the solemn voice of Robb the Lord. Bran, I promise you, whatever might happen, I will not let this be forgotten. Something in his tone made Bran even more fearful. What will you do? He asked as Theon Greyjoy reined in beside them. Theon thinks I should call the banners, Robb said. Blood for blood. For once Greyjoy did not smile. His lean, dark face had a hungry look to it. Shout out to Theon the Hungry Wolf Stark, and black hair fell down across his eyes. Only the Lord can call the banners, Bran said, as the snow drifted down around them. If your father dies, Theon said, Robb will be Lord of Winterfell. He won't die, Bran screamed at him. Robb took his hand. He won't die, not father, he said calmly. Still, the honor of the North is in my hands now. When our Lord Father took his leave of us, he told me to be strong for you and for Rickon. I'm almost a man grown, Bran. And that last paragraph really hits it home with what Robb, the responsibility that's being put on Robb. He's now got to decide to go to war. Not only does he have to lead his family, instantly the first decision he has is, should I go to war with the South? Which is God, that's a heavy weight.
That is a heavy weight. Can you imagine having to make those type of decisions at 15 years old? When I was 15 years old, I had a hard time figuring out I was going to wear that day, or you know, what I was going to have for lunch. I don't know how you would be able to really be thrust into that role where you're making decisions for an entire for his entire kingdom. You know, he's made a king, and he's only 15 years old. He goes to war. I really just can't process how he was able to do that. And Ned really is able to put him into that, give him those examples and provide him with that understanding and knowledge, and and experiences to where he's actually able to do it pretty successfully. And I think that Catelyn actually did a good job of allowing him to become Lord of Winterfell, of allowing him to become King of the North. There's a lot of mothers that would possibly be a little bit too controlling, and she really does step back some and allow him to make decisions. So I think that for his age, I think he did a really great job. He just made a couple bad decisions.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. And it's kind of like, I don't know, there's a lot of flack that Kat gets. There's a lot of that going on in the chat right now, which it's wrong. So whatever. That's fine. But I don't know. I just feel like Robb was forced into this role just like all of these kids were. They're too young. They're all too young for this. All of them. Sansa going to King's Landing, being pushed into this relationship with no political training. She had Septa Mordain, who was falling over drunk asleep at dinner too often. Like, I don't know what people don't see, that this was just flawed. You had Bran and Rickon went off with Osha the Wildling and Hodor as their leads. Robb was forced into this. Catelyn was there to protect and make sure as a representative of the North alongside him and of her son. I mean, that was the child that when she had to wait in war for Ned to come back, not knowing if he'd come back, pregnant with his kid, pregnant with his first and only legacy so far, like, all she had was that. That was the only way to hold to it after she had already been promised to this other man that died and done her duty over and over again. And so she comes home and Ned brings home this bastard that's rumored it's from another highborn lady. Everybody's saying it's Ashara Danes. And, by not saying anything, it's pitted on her. She grows this hatred in her heart, of course. And like, she just is trying her best. Like, she's like, all right, Robb, your dad's dead. I'm losing my mind already. This is not going to go well, but I got to be there. I got to be there with my kid. So.
And actually, Catelyn does a pretty good job of sort of it's almost not even parenting Robb at this point. It's more like training. Like as his advisor, she mostly does pretty well. She does the same thing that Ned did, where she forces him to think through things and doesn't just tell him, what he should do. He asks him questions and teases it out. And obviously, she's not perfect. No one is perfect, but there is a pretty interesting dynamic with Kat and Robb in the second and third book, as far as that goes. Amanda, did you have something to add to that?
Oh, no, I just want to say that I agree completely. She does allow him to make a lot of the decisions, but she's more of a guide, an advisor. There was one example where Robb had to decide which lords he wanted at doing certain jobs, and she kind of gave him the skinny on each of the lords. Like with Roose, Roose, you really had to watch, whereas the Umbers, they were they had less motives and they were more loyal, but you kind of had to identify the strengths of each of your bannermen and be able to put them into the roles that they were that they're best suited. And so she really does provide him with a lot of guidance, but she's also able to step back and allow him to rule as Lord of Winterfell and also King of the North.
And I think that going back to Robb's age, that's just such an important thing, because I remember growing up as a teenager, and I think a lot of people feel that way too. You're transitioning into growing up, and yeah, Kat is guiding him. There will be times when she might give stronger advice or not, but what she's doing is she's taking him seriously in his considerations and taking him seriously as he becomes an adult. And I think that that's just hard, since the conversation is being parented. Like, that's a hard thing to do as a parent, to make your kids feel as though you're taking their concerns seriously at that age. Because I mean, the fact of the matter is, like, you are a teenager and you kind of think you know all these things, and the catch is Robb has to know all these things and make these decisions.
Right.
But as a teenager, you feel like you know a lot of things. You want to be treated like an adult, but you're not really ready yet to take on these adult responsibilities, which I guess Robb has to do. Who?
And that's the other thing is Kat has never been the Lord of Winterfell. She's a Southerner in the Wolves' Den. She's never had that okay to go ahead and just be the lady and have to make these choices. She's a widow. She just had her husband, who was the Lord, die, and now she has to take up this big role while making the right choices for the whole North. Like, this is not her giving counsel to Robb. Isn't just like, well, I need to go into the yard and say, like, go do this in the blacksmith, like do this. I don't know. It wasn't just that. It was, this is the future of our people, the people we are sworn to protect. We are to protect the North. And so not only that, but she's also upholding her honor to her family, whether it be her Stark family or whether it be the Tullys, and trying to make these right choices. And she doesn't even have experience in it. So let alone Robb doesn't, let alone she doesn't. You can't really judge her like, well, you didn't do a good job, Catelyn, since you've never done it before. I mean, it's just kind of, it's very nuanced. It's way more gray than the black and white. She was awful. And I feel like we're just going to ban it right now in the live stream. We're not going to talk about Kat taking Tyrion on whether it was a good choice or not.
Yeah, I'm
We're
totally
not going to go
fine with
there.
that.
That's banned.
Because the thing is, the whole point of this conversation is not to judge the characters. It's to think about how Martin writes the characters. The point of writing the characters is to give them compelling conflicts where there isn't an easy right answer, and they just have to do their best. And sometimes they choose well, or they make a choice that works out in some ways, but has unintended repercussions that they then have to deal with. This is how you write stuff that feels realistic. It needs to be debatable. Very little should be clear cut, and he succeeded very well at that with Kat and with Ned, and that's what we're trying to get at.
Yeah, I also want to, coming back to Robb, talk a little bit again about how he's thrust into this position and has to take on Ned's role. You can see how well, in some ways, he took on those lessons given to him by his parents, while, of course, he falls short because he's like 15 or 16. His younger siblings look up to him in a way that feels like he is, yes, it feels a little bit like he is their father. When Sansa is trying to find courage, I want to say it's in Clash, she thinks to herself, not what would father do, in the way that Ned, speaking of like how the parents are themselves parented, Ned throughout his chapters is always thinking, what would Jon Arryn do? And I do think it's interesting that he doesn't ever think, what would Rickard do? So Sansa draws strength in thinking, what would Robb do? How would Robb handle the situation? I must be strong like Robb. And you see that also in Bran's chapters. You see that in the affection Jon holds for Robb, more of like as his brother, but he's this guiding presence for them in a way that, we'll probably touch on Robert Baratheon later, but Robert wasn't a presence in his kid's life, and we can see that in many ways he fell short being an older brother to Stannis and Renly.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. There is actually a Facebook group on Facebook that's dedicated to Game of Thrones, and one of our people on Twitter, she goes by JoJo Lady Dane. She's one of the moderators for it. It's one of the largest Game of Thrones groups and A Song of Ice and Fire groups on Facebook. And there is actually a member that does defenses of disliked characters that we would describe as villainous. And I can't recall the name of the user, but he did an excellent defense of Joffrey, of all people. It really goes down to, and you see, Robert, he was an alcoholic. He was, most of the time, he was an absentee parent. He spent a lot of his time drinking and whoring. He did not do a good job of providing his son with guidance, with discipline. And his son, if you recall, there's an instance where he killed kittens, and he took it to his father. And instead of his father, explaining why it's not okay to hurt animals. His father just beat him. And you can see that I think that when there's the attempt on Bran's life, he overheard his father say that somebody should just put him out of his misery. And it's just another one of those things where he gets this idea in his head from his father. And it's almost like he's seeking his father's approval. He's trying to get some sort of attention and kind of going off of what his father is doing. And so Robert Baratheon is absolutely a very good example of bad parenting, and his son really being affected by that. And so I agree completely with your take on Robert.
And even on that, like, even to Maya Stone, you hear her and someone else talk about, you know, how several times you hear Ned talk about it, you hear Maya talk about it, that she remembers this man who used to come and play with her until one day he didn't. And you hear Ned say, you know, I went along every time to these meetings, and then until I didn't, you know, I saw her every time with Robert. He dragged me along, and then he just quit going one day. I mean, even with the kids that he hasn't necessarily like focally abused like that, you know, and like not parented, like abandonment is just as big of a thing with parenting. I mean, it's just very easy to have happen. So it's interesting to look at him even from those perspectives. He parented incorrectly all the way across the bastard board too.
He did, and this is a perfect example of just what I was talking about. Like, Joffrey is one of the most detestable, unsympathetic characters in the book, and yet when you stop and think about it, it's like, oh wait, he is 13, by the way. He's got a lot of problems, but he was raised horribly by two horrible people. And you can trace out very specifically the kinds of mistakes that they made. And he also, somebody in the chat's pointing out, in fact, it was Helen O'Grady typing all the way from Australia. Thanks, Helen. To point out that Joffrey also saw his dad beat his mom on occasion. I mean, my parents went through a divorce, and there was no abuse like that, but just seeing your parents scream at each other is horrible. And it's traumatic. It's really traumatic. And he probably saw worse than that. You know, we kind of know that he did. So this is what I mean. Like, when you're writing, you're a Joffrey. Don't just make him a crazy kid and make it for no reason. Like, you have to put stuff like this in there, or it doesn't make sense. Or Joffrey just is a two-dimensional person. Like, he's more terrifying when you realize the reason why he's so cruel and sadistic. So yeah, we don't need to harp on the point, but great points, you guys. So I think we were talking about Robb. Is there anything more to say about Robb? I mean, we
were talking about Robb.
Yeah,
who's Robb?
Who's Robb?
This was the plan, is to jump off wherever, you know, into discussion.
Yeah, for sure.
I think we got most of what's going on with him. He has to turn into Robb the Lord, and he does a pretty good job. But ultimately, he makes the big mistake that he makes, of course, is Jane Westerling, and this is the thing that a 15-year-old would do. And also, part of his decision making was his idea of honor, of like, well, I got her pregnant, I got to marry her, right? And so this is like a 15-year-old trying to be honorable and do the right thing, but also, you know, being hot for this girl. And he makes a mistake that basically brings down his kingdom. It opens up the opportunity for Roose to betray him, although he was obviously looking for that opportunity. Robb handed it to him on a silver platter, and the same thing goes with the phrase. So if you guys have anything you want to add about Robb, go ahead. Otherwise, I think we'll move on to Sansa.
Oh, no.
Oh, no. Okay, it sounds quiet. Let's do it. Let's go to Sansa. You want to kick it off, Chloe?
All right, but I'm going to be talking for a while.
Well, give us a chance to jump in when you've made a good point.
Yeah.
There you go.
No, absolutely. And I really want to hear more Amanda, because I know she's been drowned out by us half the time. So, Amanda, just yell at us, please.
Hey, you drunks.
Whoa.
Hey.
Whoa.
Hey.
This is my second glass of wine, first off.
I noticed your camera screen got muted there for a second. Is it time? Oh, it's only 4:08.
I don't subscribe to society's time limits on that.
Oh.
Thank you. I just go wherever I feel. I mean, I'll hit it then too.
Day raging.
Day raging. Hashtag blaze it. Where was I? Legally. is it?
Sansa, pretty
Sansa.
princess Sansa.
So Sansa, it's cool because we've talked a lot about how these kids especially fill very later subverted tropes, but also they fill these tropes at the beginning. You start it with the young warrior knight Robb, about to take over for his dad and bring justice and vengeance. You hear Bran, who wants nothing more than to be a knight. And then you get to Arya, who's the headstrong, tomboy who just wants to play with swords. You get to Sansa finally, who is the typical like daddy-daughter, dad's princess trope, but it gets completely subverted when her head gets slapped off, right? Because parents protecting you by not telling you the truth and naivety kind of stuff, so much that Sansa adopts this excessive trust in people that do the right thing or that she thinks would. It's a really interesting story with a really interesting trope that ends up subverted there. And Sansa starts as this very pretty princess character who can be good at everything, but then ends up broken down after learning the hard way.
I feel like David's saying things, but like his microphone's muted.
Oh, I was muted. Yeah, no. I was just saying that's our chance. If you guys want to jump in, she gave us a breath.
You get one breath and 2 more walls of text after this.
No, I'm cool. You can keep rolling. Amanda, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say Sansa did have to grow up very quickly after the death of her father. It was just a real huge wake-up call for her. She was sheltered. She was sheltered basically her whole life. She thought that everything was just courtesy and the womanly arts, singing, dancing, poetry. Everything was just a fairy tale. She always compared everything to the storylines and songs. Even afterward, when Dantos came to her, she was just like, oh, I'm Jonquil and you're Florian. And that's how she kind of rationalized, what is going on is the stuff from fairy tales. And she basically, throughout her entire arc and storyline, she had to kind of grow up and learn that, life is not a fairy tale. And that's one of the things that her parents did is they sheltered her. And I totally agree with you, Chloe. That was her big downfall was her naivety.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like Ned gave that to her. A lot of people like to compare it to Kat bringing her up that way, but at the same time, Ned nurtured her that, that was his daughter and she was going to grow up and marry a lord and things were great in Winterfell and someday she would get to be out there and see it. I mean, we even hear, there's a couple quotes from Kat and Ned. I mean, when Ned kills her wolf, he thinks about like, what the heck did I just do? There's an actual quote, which I know I totally threw somewhere around here that I want to look at from him. But when Ned kills Sansa's wolf, it's not just him killing her childhood pet. That's him killing her innocence. That's him killing her identity in a way. And it's really interesting that he and Kat let her head be filled with idealistic notions before sending her straight into a lion's den. It's Arya that gets this passage with Ned where he says, we've come to a scary place, my child. It's not Sansa. It's not who's married to the crown prince. It's Sansa does her duty as what's expected of her in the societal norm that she's going to be a lady and be appropriate and make her parents proud and be an example and marry a guy that her parents say she should marry. And she puts herself into this princess trope of it to make her kind of almost be able to deal with it in the end. I mean, and this happens through A Clash of Kings. You see her, finally embrace lying from Sandor, who is actually really her big paternal figure in A Clash of Kings, and at the end of A Game of Thrones, he teaches her more than Ned did in King's Landing.
That is very true, and I think that really, if you really, there's a lot going on in the chat. I'll just say that we're not going to react to every bit of that. There's a lot of hot takes going on in the chat. That's good. I'm glad you guys are fired up about the topic. I will say though that a lot of the criticism of Sansa is very irritating and two-dimensionally transparent and flat. And I do have to take a moment to sort of gripe about it, or not gripe about it, but she's 11, okay? She starts off 11, 12, and when she starts, it seems like her dreams are coming to life. the beautiful royal court rides into stuffy old Winterfell. Here's the beautiful tall prince, and he's acting polite. And it's like, oh yes, guess what? He's for you. Here's your prince riding right into your fucking throne room to make your dreams come true, and you get to be queen. So like, who the fuck is going to get worked up about the fact that she like buys into that and gets excited? I mean, these are the songs coming to life for her. And then starting with the whole incident with Arya and the wolf and the butcher boy, it's just, it goes horrible. It turns into a nightmare. And here she is, where at the end of Dance, she's now, I guess, 14 or so. She's starting to figure out what the hell's going on. She's still fucking 14. Okay. And at this point, she's doing pretty damn well. I personally have never had to deal with any kind of trauma on that scale as an adult or as a child. I can only imagine being a female in Westeros and being 11 and then having all that shit happen to you. So I think I'm not only defending Sansa, I'm defending the way that Sansa is written. I think Sansa is written really well. If you're going to write an 11-year-old girl, you can't make her fucking action hero, badass, I know everything. Like that doesn't work. Like you see them try to do that to Arya in the TV show, and it's stupid. You know, it's like these are little kids, and they can do things, yes, but they need to show the fact that they're inexperienced while they're doing it. And Sansa's arc is full of that. So I'll step off the soapbox now, but there you go.
Well, to respond to that too, Sansa was written as the black sheep of the family. That's what George wrote her as. He wrote her as kind of like this, alternative to what he had going. He had these Starks who all loved each other. He had Bran, he had Rickon, he had Robb, he had Jon Snow, who was moody in the corner. He had Arya, who hung out with the boys all day and just was wild and fun. And he wrote Sansa as the black sheep. In the original outline of the original trilogy, George wrote that Sansa was going to end up having Joffrey's baby and regret it deeply after, eventually regret that she had turned on her family. And he skipped that because he realized that was even more unfair, honestly, than what he was already doing. So we could have had worse Sansa, but Sansa is learning from the mistakes not only that her parents made, but she's learning from the mistakes she made. And to be fair, of course she's going to trust Cersei. I will yell about this for the rest of my life that of course Sansa was going to go to Cersei. She was told by Catelyn and by her father in the books that she was going to go to court. She was going to see singers and learn to play the high harp. They literally, her dad's was, so there's a quote from Catelyn in Cat 6 in A Clash of Kings where it says that Sansa did the same, though few singers ever cared to make the long journey to Winterfell. I told her there would be singers at the king's court, though. I told her she would hear music of all sorts, that her father could find some master to help her learn the high harp. Oh, gods, forgive me. This is something that when Sansa is on her knees pleading for her dad's life in court, when Varys comes to Ned's cell and he's dying and he's in agony and he's experiencing all the end-of-life trauma, he's thinking about Lyanna and he's thinking about those ruined skulls of the Targaryen children. He's thinking about all this. And Varys just says, your daughter pleaded so sweetly for you. I mean, it's such a big crux of just all these emotions in the story. And Ned and Kat feel so much guilt because they didn't tell Sansa how court was going to be. They didn't tell her that people actually really suck here. They're the worst. Absolutely. She wasn't prepared for it. She was never going to be prepared for it. They filled her head with all these songs. She tried to kidnap a singer in Winterfell, you guys. A singer came and she begged her dad. She's crying. She's like, don't send him away. I love him so much. Please don't. She tried to kidnap a singer. This kid's crazy. Let her be. She's 11 years old. Shut up. She's 11. And that's how I feel about it.
I really think that her TWOW plot is going to be fascinating. We've already gotten the one sample chapter, and I won't spoil it, but you can see she's starting to take agency for sure. She's starting to make suggestions to Peter, and not just straightforward suggestions, but she's thinking about how they'll land and how Peter will consider them. She's starting to think beyond the next move and think 2 moves away. What's going to happen when I make this move? So I think she's set up to be one of the most interesting, powerful, and exciting characters going forward. So
she's the politics. She's the politics. She's going to get it.
I really like what you said, contrasting her to Marjorie. I'd never thought about that, but you're totally right. Marjorie's only a couple years older, but obviously has had an entirely different education than Sansa. And you're sure that 13 or 14-year-old Marjorie would be very different from 13 or 14-year-old Sansa too. So
yeah,
that's a really
Eliana
good-
actually pointed out something really cool about that during Girls Gone Canon, of how Ned thinks about how Sansa is at court when he doesn't want her to be there during the King's Justice chapter, when he's assigning everyone to go out and bring justice. And Eliana was like, so what would you think? Should she have been there? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely, because Marjorie Tyrell would have been there. She would have been in the aisle going down with her grandmother clutching her arm in their beautiful floral fabric, and her whispering and saying, like, so Marjorie, what did you learn from that? And educating her, which is where we see Sansa right now. She's getting that education by the end of A Feast for Crows. She's learning. Like, if you think that Sansa's arc is not to become an apt political leader, you're wrong. I mean, that's where it's going. Like, I don't make the rules, you're wrong.
I think the idea of Sansa ending up as the Lord of Winterfell, or even the Queen if there is an Iron Throne, are both potential things that could make a lot of sense depending on how George wants to land the plane. But,
I also want to say that, like, the way that how Robb and Jon and some of, like, Ned's sons, the way we see them really internalize, oh, the right thing to do is whatever Dad would do, right? But Sansa, it comes through in her storyline just much more subtly. Like, as Chloe was saying, like, Sansa was just doing what she was raised to do, and that's because, and we see this very much in Ned's storyline. Ned lives honorably. You know, we're going to see this in storyline too. They live honorably because they believe that if you live your life right and well and honorably, good things are going to happen to you. And the fact of the matter is, life isn't fair. And I mean, yeah, she's an 11-year-old person. Like, a lot of people are learning this in this day and age. Like, there are unfair things that happen to 11-year-olds, but even then, it's a long process, you know, learning that life isn't fair. Whereas the Tyrells don't seem to carry that same ethos. Their idea of the world is rather, your luck is what you make it. And so they chase after that. And I think that what we're going to see is Sansa learning some of those lessons from a different parent, a very mixed, weird, shitty parent who teaches her well politically, but is actually, like, super creepy and like, oh my god, no, you should not be allowed around children at all. Please stay away. Littlefinger, who, you know, very much is the same way. He makes his own luck.
Absolutely, he does. And so does Sandor, kind of. And you made the point that Sandor ends up, you know, teaching Sansa quite a bit too. So it's interesting, like the series of teachers that she gets, Cersei and Sandor and Littlefinger. It's interesting. It's interesting from a writer's perspective. Again, not to get all meta, but, like, you know, to create a character and then kill their parents and then give them all these, like, smart but kind of evil people. Although Sandor obviously a little more redeemable than Cersei or Littlefinger. But it's definitely an interesting dynamic that's going on there. And Chloe, I see you getting excited to say something here. You're muted though.
I mean, just like, and like you said, I mean, Sandor becomes that paternal figure to both of them, to Arya and to Sansa, which I know Crowfood's daughter has a lot to say about the Arya stuff, because half of what I wrote was like, oh, I saw Amanda wrote this, I'm going to write this about this. So,
well, the chat is clamoring for Sandor talk, so let's.
Oh, we can do that. I'm into that. I'm really into Sandor talk.
Let's go ahead and roll with that. Amanda, you want to pipe in here?
Well, most of my observations with Arya are between her and Ned, because Ned does a lot of Ned.
Oh no! I'm sorry. I meant on Sand. Before we go to Arya, I meant on Sandor and Sansa.
Oh well, Sandor as an influence, he definitely provides Sansa with one of the very first eye-opening experiences. You know, where she is taken, and he's telling her that, you know, life is not a song. He's kind of removing that dialogue that she's just kind of using as a protective mechanism. You know, she's trying to apply her life to different songs, and he's telling her, you know, life is not a song. It's you know, and so he's one of her very first eye-opening experiences, and he's basically kind of telling her to grow up, which, you know, at her age, she, you know, most people wouldn't have to do that, but in her situation, she really needs that. He's really giving her what she needed. So, yeah.
I love Sandor's philosophy. I think George speaks directly through Sandor's mouth, maybe with a little more profanity, but everything that George thinks about knights comes right out of Sandor's mouth. So he's one of those truth tellers, I think, even though he's obviously pretty rough and unpolished, if you will.
I think, just to briefly do this, because I know Chloe's got thoughts, is since this is a discussion about parenting, Sandor's philosophy on life of how life is not a song comes from the way he was parented, because everything was given to his older brother. Everything was bestowed upon Gregor, who was undeserving of it. And his dad never was like, oh, Gregor, don't burn your brother. Like, he did. He wasn't. It's not even like he was just doing the least, as a parent. And so it's funny that the way that Sandor might, in some ways, approach this informal parenting comes from his own lacking when it comes to his upbringing.
Yeah, I mean, you said it a minute ago, like the world isn't fair, and there's nothing to show you the world isn't fair than like your older brother burning your face over a toy and then having your parents take his side. It's like, oh, okay, that's how it is. All right, now I have a burned face. Cool, I get it. So the world fucking sucks, right? I mean, that's where Sandor's coming from, right?
Well, okay, there was a lot more angst that needed to be into that, first off, so I think you weren't really giving it fairness here. Okay, LML. But no, Sandor, it's really sad because he hits age 19 and he's out the house by then. He joins the Lannisters. He's in the sack at King's Landing. Sandor was there outside doing crappy work outside that he shouldn't have been doing, obviously, and he knew better. But it was to keep a flippin' meal on the table, to have a roof over his head. He went through hell all because his dad chose to tell people, no. Sandor, his bedding caught on fire. And because his dad was afraid to do what was right in parenting Gregor, he becomes such a formidable force, to be reckoned with. He was huge. He was a brute, even at age 16. And even, one of the biggest things is Rhaegar knighted Gregor. Rhaegar knighted the man that killed his actual, however you look at it, with his mistress and his whatever. I don't give a crap about Jon Snow in this sentence, okay? So just whatever. Leave Mary Sue out of this. However Gregor, was, his dad did not do the right thing. He did not stand up to his own child. And Sandor's teachings that he's learned from the girls of what mercy is, from Arya, from what Sansa, has almost parented him more than his dad did. His mom died probably in childbirth after his sister, it sounds like. I'm guessing that's what George would chalk it up to. But his whole family, his dad dies because of Gregor. His dad goes on a hunting trip with Gregor and comes back and it's just Gregor. And now it's Gregor's keep. And now Sandor leaves in the middle of the night to go join the Lannisters because that's all he has. He doesn't know what else to do. He joins his liege lord in the Westerlands and does that. So it's just really a lot of really good drama in that because Sandor doesn't know what's right. And worse is his sister died in mysterious circumstances, as we know from the books, which always has given me a Dumbledore, Grindelwald, Ariana feel from Harry Potter, if anyone's into that. What happened there? Somebody got too powerful in a fight and killed the little sister. But Sandor actually has Stark looks. He has black hair. He has long face. He has gray eyes, the Stark look. And so Arya Stark, when he goes with Arya after being in love with his sister, let's call it what it is, it's fine. And when he goes with Arya, that's his sister. That's the sister he lost. That's the young sister he lost that died in mysterious circumstances because of Gregor. And he wants to protect her while teaching her. So it's just this beautiful symphony of paternalism that we exhibit from Sandor and just all this emotion you get. It all leads up to Brienne's chapter with "and the man breaks,"
Wow.
Good. You guys can go.
There's
Thanks.
five good points there. I wanted to highlight them. Yeah, that was great. And also, of course, Sandor has all the hellhound symbolism that the Starks also use. He talks about dogs and wolves as if they're different, but really in symbolism terms, they're the same. They're both hellhounds. They're both based on Cerberus. So yeah, lots of synergy there. But you make a good point about Sandor. there is a moment, the magical thing about his and Sansa's relationship is that Sansa does actually turn around and mother Sandor. And so there, even as, it's just interesting how George flips those things around, like that scene where she's literally singing the hymn of the mother and he's crying. It's like, you can feel his childhood trauma welling up right there, you know? So
when
yeah.
she sings of mercy to him, it's great that Sansa's plot with Sandor in the first few books ends with mercy. And then Arya picks that plot up on the road with him crying in the face of fire after everything he's faced. And at the end of Arya's plot with Sandor, it's her telling him when he says, you know, show me mercy. Do you know where the heart is, girl? And then he just like yells to her, you know, like, come on, like, just fucking kill me, dude. Like, I'm asking you, I'm begging you, I'm gonna say this stuff to make you kill me. He's like, I should have raped your sister. Like, she was so pretty. Fuck your mom and your brother. Like, no one cares, kid. Like, just kill me, kill me, kill me, show me mercy. And she just looks at him and she's like, you should have saved my mom. Like, fuck you. You should die right here. You should bleed out and no one cares. I'm so mad at you because he's not doing the right thing, which is what Ned taught them, to do the right thing. Ned said, you know, this is what's right. This is justice in our eyes. This is what you should follow. And Arya thinks he's a coward because of that. And his plot just revolves around mercy. It revolves around mercy, just like Arya's does. She takes that mercy that he talks about and takes that, do you know where the heart is, on with her, even to the Winds of Winter in the sample chapter, where she calls herself Mercy.
So that actually is a perfect segue into Arya. And, you know, I'll comment and say that, you know, we saw Ned, the first thing he was doing was executing somebody. He was dealing out the justice. And here is Sandor asking Arya to execute him. And she decides that the just thing is to not execute him. And so constantly Martin is playing with this whole idea of justice and mercy. And he's not just giving it in a binary. He's showing all these different situations in which there's a different balance to be struck. And so I just think it's a theme that runs through the Stark kids. And Arya, of course, with a chapter titled Mercy, and she's learning to be an executioner, is hitting all of those bells. So Amanda, do you want to kick off the Arya talk here? You're going to need to unmute your microphone in order to do that, though. There we go.
There we go. So Arya, one of the things that as parents we strive to do, and I was mentioning it earlier, one of our roles is to provide our children with the tools necessary to be successful adults. It's why they send us to school, why we have to go to soccer practice and, you know, try different things like art. And it starts early in childhood where we're provided with skills. It starts with potty training. And I just want to say thanks, Mom, because, you know, you have absolutely no idea how often I use that skill. Like, it's great. But but no, it's our job to shape our children, to mold them, and to provide them what they need to become successful adults. And in doing so, one of the skills that they need for highborn girls, and we see that very early on in A Game of Thrones with Arya and Sansa and Myrcella, is being instructed in the womanly arts. They're provided with needlepoint lessons, because that's I guess one of the skills they need as highborn girls. But you can see very early on she's rebelling against that. She's rebelling against what she feels like her role is supposed to be, the skills that she should have. Instead, we see her as a tomboy. And the really great thing that I see with Ned is his acceptance of that. He sees Arya as kind of like a Eliana 2.0, and he mentions it after she becomes very teary-eyed after having that huge incident between Septa Mordane and with the needle point incident. And he finds Needle later on, and he tells her, let me see if we have the quote here, but see, he tells her, "This is no toy for children, least of all for a girl. What would Septa Mordane say if she knew you were playing with swords?" "I wasn't playing, Arya. insisted Martine. That's enough. Her father's voice was curt and hard. The Septa is doing no more than her duty, though gods know you have made it a struggle for the poor woman. Your mother and I have charged her with the impossible task of making you a lady. I don't want to be a lady, Arya flared. I ought to snap this toy across my knee and put an end to the nonsense. Needle would defiantly, but her voice betrayed her words. It has a name, does it? Her father sighed. Ah, Arya, you have a wildness in you, child. The wolf blood, my father used to call it. Lyanna had a touch of it, and my brother Brandon more than a touch. It brought them both to an early grave. Arya heard the sadness in his voice. He did not often speak of his father or of his brother and sister, who had died before when she was born. Lyanna might have carried a sword if my father had allowed it. You remind me of her sometimes. You even look like her. So when that scene happens, he is identifying the sister that he lost in that scene, and he's identifying it in his daughter. And he kind of has a special place in his heart for Arya because of that. And even though, playing with swords is incredibly looked down upon in Westerosi society for highborn girls, he not only allows it, but he is providing her with, dancing lessons, which he's disguising as providing her with more instruction in the womanly arts. But instead, he's allowing her to kind of follow her dreams and desires and wishes. And I really like that part about Ned, where he's, fostering the and able to allow his children to kind of go out and seek and develop those interests, even though they aren't matching what society says is acceptable. And, I
actually want to stop you and harp on the point you just made. One of the best things that Ned does is that he realizes his different kids need different things. And Arya is probably the best example of that, where he doesn't really try to force her into trying to be Sansa, and he doesn't really shame her for being Sansa. And guys, I think I might even just chop the Bran section altogether so that we can mention some of the Lannisters. But one of the things that you see with Bran is that Ned doesn't tell Bran not to climb. He understands that climbing is something Bran needs to do. And of course, Bran's climbing is a metaphor for his gaining magical sight. And so you can see that Ned is encouraging his kids to do different things. And that's one thing that you mentioned with Arya. It really jumps out at me. Like, even the fact that he calls it dancing lessons is almost like a nod to, like, oh yeah, we're sort of keeping up appearances, but not really, like wink, wink. Yeah, I think we've all had that. At least hopefully I had the dad that would wink and like give you some candy and be like, don't tell mom, which is actually really bad to do, to undermine the other parent. But, oh well, you get my point. So now, Amanda, okay, look, guys, there's an elephant in the room. I'll just say it. There's an elephant in the room. Arya is very comparable to another character. Someone goes by the name of Lyanna that we do have to talk about. So Amanda, carry on with Arya, knowing full well that we are about to go to Lyanna Town.
Okay, so like I said, Ned sees Arya. She's got a special place in his heart for Arya. He compares her to Lyanna and on several occasions, and even in one of Bran's visions, he actually sees a vision of what he thought was originally Arya, but he was actually seeing a vision of Lyanna, and I think that they were playing swords in that vision. And when we see Arya, they talk about her, ability to ride horses. Lyanna has the ability to, they talk about Lyanna's ability to ride horses. Ned has compared her to Lyanna on several occasions. She's basically kind of like, a Lyanna 2.0, for lack of a better terms. And so basically Ned sees his sister in Arya. And so he kind of has that special place in his heart because he's identifying that sister that he lost. And so when he's, seeing Arya rebelling, when he's seeing Arya with her sword, when he's seeing all these, different things that this willful, wild-blooded child is doing, he's seeing his sister. So he's kind of taking it from that perspective. And I think it's very endearing to read in the storyline. So yeah, it's Arya is one of my favorite characters. And I really like that he incorporated that portion of comparing her and Lyanna together.
Yeah, you really get that idea that like he sees a lot of Lyanna in Arya, and that's why he just can't curb her habits, because it's too like he's just hung up on Lyanna in a way. And so I think we can it's been fun to watch Chloe sort of like fidget and just wait for her chance, but let's stop torturing her and let her get in on this action here.
Hello, my name's Chloe. I've been a Lyanna Stark addict for about 4 years now, 5 years now.
This is what you've been waiting for, people.
I've got a lot of feelings about. I'm really sorry. I feel like poor Eliana's just like crouching right now. She's over there chilling, just experiencing the chat, experiencing us talking. So I'm like, I'm gonna make this happen real quick so that my wife, who's the best, can talk. So Eddard does put all the stock in Arya with this Lyanna connection. And you can even see it. There's a passage where Sansa can't comprehend how Arya is, she was ragged and gross and had bruises and splotches and went out in the gardens and in the mud and whatever, playing around all day. And she brought Ned purple flowers, purple little rose flowers, whatever, and he smiled. And he was just very sweet about it, where Sansa thought, father's going to be ever so cross with you. Like, you're dirty as hell, kid. Like this is, I work so hard to be the perfect kid, and this is what my sister does. And it's just like some really good sister, discourse. But she doesn't understand. And what the reader is supposed to take from that is Ned saying constantly how Lyanna was fond of flowers and how Lyanna loves flowers. But then we go on to say that, yes, Ned sees Lyanna and Arya. He sees the parts that he loved. He sees these parts that made him smile, of the spirit of this willfulness, of Arya's sword fighting like Lyanna. Suddenly she has a sword that she hid, of, like the Night of the Laughing Tree story, which canonically exists to tell you that Lyanna was the Night of the Laughing Tree. And in the World of Ice and Fire, there's a cool line where it says that Rhaegar and his friends went out to find the Night of the Laughing Tree, and suddenly, no connection. The next day, Lyanna was the Queen of Love and Beauty. And so, like, that's great. The Lyanna connection is cool between Arya and Lyanna, but there is a connection between Sansa and Lyanna that a lot of people fail to pull out. Ned sees the weaker parts of Sansa and Lyanna. He sees Lyanna at the Harrenhal feast getting wine poured over her head, or pouring wine, over Benjen's head, because he made fun of her for crying when Rhaegar plays Jenny's song, right? Like, he sees Sansa, who kidnapped a singer in Winterfell, basically, for a couple weeks. Like, he sees Sansa, like, who is in love with Sogs and knights and the tourney. Even at the tourney, the hands tourney, like, there's a little bit of condescending Ned to Sansa talk, like, Sansa wanted to be here, and I didn't think she should, but she's all, like, watching these dudes get killed, whatever. Like, how disconnected he is with his daughter in that. And there's even a line when Sansa actually goes to Cersei to tell her about how, Dad's making us leave after, he forbade her to go to Joffrey. She says, I felt as willful as Arya. Like, Sansa gets willful, wicked feelings. Sansa does have the wolf blood, very much, to those that want to argue on that. I mean, it's an interesting connection, though, that Ned sees the parts of Sansa that won't survive, that aren't good, like what killed Lyanna, being in love with a crown prince.
Yeah, that's a great point. And as you were talking, my mind leapt to the scene where Sansa is pleading for the life of Lady, and Ned is thinking of Lyanna in his head during that moment. So that's like a very explicit comparison, but there's also those more subtle ones that you highlighted. So thank you. That's awesome. And that's a good example of again, good writing. Okay, it's like Arya is the obvious Lyanna parallel, but George was also clever enough to make some Sansa Lyanna parallels that are more subtle. And it does the same thing with like how much Ned and how much Cat you can see in each kid. He always mixes those two things and thinks about that because different kids take different parts of their parents based on their personality. So that was really the point of this entire affair here, this podcast topic, was to think about this as a writer, how to write good characters and create characters that people can relate to. Because when you think about all these family dramas that form and inform who we are as people, there's some of them that you can relate to. Like, depending on what your specific trauma was, you might relate to one kid or the other, or one person's experience or the other. But by writing all this stuff into his characters, he's creating characters that we can relate to. And that's what keeps people hooked into the story. I mean, what does George Martin say over and over? The Faulkner quote about the heart in conflict. What is the heart in conflict? It means, what are you torn up about? What gets you to that point where like you're anguished about something or you're just not sure what to do? And he's crafted these moments with the upbringing of each character very strongly factoring into all of this and setting the backdrop. So it's kind of like the world building for each character, really, their family drama and the way that they were raised. And it's super important. So great points on Leanna there. That was really cool. So can we turn it over to the Lannisters here? I've got a section that I labeled The Pride of Lions. And the first point says, Tywin is a bad parent, discuss. So I will open that up to whoever's. You're all muted.
Well, I think that we should start with Tyrion.
Let's do it.
I think let's do this. So, Tywin, he basically treats Tyrion horribly throughout the entire series. Up until the point where Tyrion is brought to the point where he actually kills his father. Tywin kind of brings it onto himself. He, has told his son, I should have killed you. He blames him for the death of his wife, and he loved his wife. He loved Joanna. He sees his son as a monster, as a bastard, and he'll tell them that. And I don't know if I've always been very nurtured growing up and everything, but he basically provides his son with incredible psychological abuse throughout his entire life, even at the age of I think 18 or so, or 16, when he became a man. He wanted to go to Essos, and he basically told him, no, because you're an embarrassment and I don't want you representing me. And so he said, if you do, don't come back. And, and Tyrion resents that, and he thinks back to that, and, it's affected him. And so you really feel so much, angst and conflict when you're reading, interactions between Tywin and Tyrion. And it ultimately leads to his demise. But yeah, it's a perfect example of horrible parenting.
Okay, so I just felt my soapbox slide under my feet. Someone in the chat has made the point that Tywin was an effective parent, not a good one, but he made some of the best equipped children for Westeros. I'm going to have to politely disagree and say that all of the failures of House Lannister are directly traceable to Tywin's failures as a parent. That is why Cersei is failing. That is why Jaime was failing, and it is Jaime's turning away from Tywin, which is leading to his redemption. And that is all the problems that Tyrion has, and the way that his children go at each other and bring their own house down. That is all Tywin's fault. So Tywin's parenting was not effective in any sense. He was a complete monster, and that is why his house is going to end in absolute ruins. And it's more than he deserves. It's everything that he deserves. So there you go. Anyone want to?
I agree that Tywin is a bad parent. You don't just decide, oh, hey, let me emotionally abuse and also sexually abuse my child, because that is what happened when Tywin A, of course, Tysha was raped, and B, because Tyrion was a child and couldn't necessarily make those right choices and consent, like, while of course he participated and that was very bad, he was sexually abused by Tywin using his power over him. And none of this is to like excuse anything of how Tywin treats his children, but because this is something that I think is very interesting, this idea of intergenerational stories, because A Song of Ice and Fire is very much that. That's why there's so much world building around everything of like, oh, my parents were like this, and then that's, you know, we talked about it with Ned. His family was like this, and that's how he ends up being the way he is. So I think that the story of House Lannister is in very many ways that intergenerational story, right? Like, we're going to touch on this a little soon with Cersei, but Tywin's
Eliana,
story...
I'm sorry, can I just pause real quick? I just want to say that the chat is very smart, and they are all over this. As soon as we talked about Tywin, everyone's like, Tydos. So
yes. Yeah, I think I first saw like Colin VW call it out, and I was like, yes, I'm ready. Yeah. We're going to talk about this. Yeah, so it's not just like that Tydos was raised by... Yes, Tydos was a laughingstock and a weak, ineffectual ruler, but thinking about how Tydos actually was as a father, I think it's one lens that you can think of it through is that I was listening to Nauticast, I want to say, talking about Tyrion 2, and it struck me that a lens that we can see Tywin through is that he's a single father, and Tydos had to also be a single father. So Tywin saw, sure, that his father was a laughingstock, but it seems like Tydos straight up just wasn't there for his kids. He wasn't strong enough for them, in that he wasn't engaging with them at all. Like, he wasn't taking care of their home during the War of the Nine Penny Kings, while Tydos sends his three eldest sons. He sends Tywin, Kevin, and Tygett to go fight in this war, to risk their lives, while he stays behind in Casterly Rock, and he doesn't even provide strategic guidance, like the way Jaehaerys II was convinced not to participate in the war, even though Aerys II was there, but Jaehaerys was presumably A, running the kingdom, so he had responsibilities, and B, perhaps actually giving some military guidance. Tydos wasn't doing any of that. And you contrast that with how Tywin would see that the Baratheons were on the field. Like, Lord Ormond Baratheon fights alongside his son, Steffan, and he dies in his son's arms. You know, you see a father who's there for his kids and is willing to lay his life perhaps down for them, fight alongside them on the battlefield. So when Tywin comes back from the War of the Nine Penny Kings, he and his brothers are all like, we are not going to stand this anymore. Dad, get your shit together, all right? Because Tydos wasn't ruling. That's what made him a laughingstock. He wasn't taking care of his kids. He was too busy running around with women, and he wasn't showing his kids. He wasn't providing a proper example to them of this is how you live in the world. You know, as Amanda was talking about earlier, a parent has to prepare their kids for these things, and Tydos wasn't doing that. He wasn't an engaged parent. And so what you end up seeing is Tywin swinging so far the other way on the pendulum, reacting too hard to like the way his father parented them. And you can see that Tywin's own siblings, like Jenna and Kevin, really admire Tywin, and maybe Tywin wasn't like as no, he was still pretty extreme, as we know. But like, you can see that his siblings respect him and saw Tywin as standing up for them, like when it came to Jenna's marriage and so forth. But he ends up becoming too involved and overbearing, and in his attempt to try and maybe secure something for his kids and like be a part of their lives, he ends up trying to control them too much. He doesn't let them be their own people, doesn't support them, doesn't even like, does he know that Jaime and Cersei are like having sexual relations? Because like, that's a thing that maybe a parent should know. And Joanna saw that and took measures, but Tywin doesn't really address it. And instead of being a neglectful father, he ends up becoming an abusive one.
Right. And this is the way that parenting so often works, is you get these pendulum swings where, well, my dad was like this, so I'm going to be the opposite. Or my dad was like this, and so through irony, and I'm going to end up repeating it even though I hate it. It's usually one of those two things. Ideally, you like heal from it and come back to the middle, but usually it's either a pendulum swing or you end up recreating the same sins. And the thing about Tytos being such a weak ruler for the house was that it created this void. And Tywin, at the age of about 12 or so, started making really hard decisions in his mind and making walls in his mind and making very absolute judgments about the world, being like, this is bullshit. In order to write this, we're going to have to be strong and aggressive and fierce. And it works for him. And he just keeps on with that. And so he's basically never changed since he was 13 and flipped that switch in his mind and was like, no, you got to drown every last one of those motherfuckers and teach people a lesson. And that's how you do this shit. And it leads to the point of the whole thing with Tysha and I can't even talk about it. It's so upsetting. Tywin is a fucking monster. To do that to your child, to do that to anybody. I mean, Tywin is a psychopath or a sociopath or whatever the right word is. Like, this is somebody who has no empathy. He's burned his empathy on the altar of strength, essentially, long ago. And this is a direct result of the weakness of Tytos. So I don't know. That's my take on it.
Tywin burned himself on trying to outlive his father's meager legacy. He knew he had to uphold the Lannister name. He put all this weight in that. And he made these choices that in his mind, I'm sure he justified as these are just, this is how it is. This is how we're going to rise to power. This is how my kids are going to make a great name for themselves. And I mean, it all went to shit on him. It all did. I mean, Jaime cloaked. That was his heir. Jaime was his heir. Cersei and Jaime, rumors of their incest, had to have reached him at some point. I mean, it's just he made all these choices thinking this is how it will work. This is how we'll get better because it's the sins that my father did not do, I must do instead. This is the right way to power, where my dad chose the wrong things and it put us in the ground. And there wasn't enough nuance or in between where someone like Ned, tries to embrace what Arya is about and tries to let her be that person. He doesn't, there's no way for Tywin with this hell-strucken children horde of a weird monster imp in his eyes and incest twins. Cersei, Joanna says it best in her little vision to Jaime, whether we know if it's a vision or a dream or if it's made up or not. She says it best of, Tywin wanted his kids to be a queen and a knight. And Jaime says, this is us. This is us. We're the queen and knight. And she cries. I mean,
yeah. Amanda, you want to?
Yeah. Well, I think that the hard takes that Tywin does in response to his father really set the tone for the rest of his life, like you were saying. And it's the Reigns of Castamere actually becomes their house's theme song. And it's basically they're being associated with basic, no mercy, just killing everyone. And it's something that we see over and over again and again. Jaime and Cersei and even Tyrion, they take that sort of pride where, we're whose place is it to judge the lion? We're better than you, and this is our theme song. We're going to overpower and kill anybody who stands in our way. And instead of really providing their children with an understanding of how the world really works, they're basically putting themselves on this pedestal, and they're putting them in a place where they're the only other place to go is down. And that's exactly what's happening now in the storyline. And it kind of sets Cersei up. She thinks that she is deserving, that she is that she should be married to Rhaegar, that she is deserving of being the queen. And it's this entitlement of being a Lannister. And it's setting up all of these examples and morals and values, and it's really the cause of his house's downfall. So you can see how George kind of takes the Lannisters from this, really high place, and they're basically being killed off. Everybody's put in a place by a dance where everybody's put in a very very delicate situation, and it's not going to go very well for House Lannister. And
and of course, in terms of mythological parallels, we know that the origin tale of the Lannisters was somebody coming in and basically stealing the rock from the Casterlys. And so, of course, if those of you who are fans of Tyrion Targaryen theories, such as myself, we could be seeing a similar thing where the last Lannister who has the rock is not even a Lannister, which would be apropos, I would think. Or maybe it'll just get broken and destroyed by a moon meteor or something like that. Drink, motherfuckers, drink! I've had the chat begging me to say a moon meteor, so I had to get one in there. But Chloe, and by the way, I very much admire the chat's flexibility. They've essentially adopted the Girls Gone Canon drinking cues. Like any sort of talk of dad, I think, is triggering drinking. So this is good. The drunks in the chat know how to adapt, so that's good. But you wanted to say something about you want to mention Jaime real quick, Chloe?
Yeah, I know we vaguely hit Cersei, and there's so much more to go through there, especially with her not understanding why she couldn't be the Jaime, in the story, why she couldn't wear the pants, she couldn't have the sword. And obviously there's so much more to go with Mother Madness there. Jaime, I mean, it's so interesting that he was forced at such a young age. I mean, Cersei basically pulled one on him, and it was like, I'll be with you forever, brother that I'm in love with forever, and you've only ever been with me, and this is fun. Oh, I'm just grossed out saying it. Wow, that's gross. And I'm an only child, so incest sounds gross to me. I don't know about you guys. I don't know how you feel. I don't want to be too edgy in this day and age.
It's gross.
It's gross. Okay, it's still gross. I just learned it was gross from LOL. Cool. So the hot take is that incest is gross. And so Jaime, Cersei basically told him, I'm going to be in the capital and I'm going to marry this prince, which she says is the prince she's always wanted in her POV. Like, I just wanted to be with Rhaegar. Sounds like someone else we know, young Sansa, and she gets that dream crushed underneath her. And she tells Jaime, well, I'm going to be there before she gets crushed. She says, so you should come here and then we could be together forever. And he joins, he takes a vow to be a forever for life virgin, except for when you bang your sister. And, those few instances, few and far between, that you bang your sister, I guess. And yeah, so Jaime is stuck there and he's stuck in this lifehood, and that frames everything he does. And he uses Cersei as his justifiable means out of it, but there's no justifiable means out of it. He knows it's never gonna be a we're married and we're king and queen of the kingdom. And at the most, if he gets that chance, he gonna kill her. And the fact that Tywin's shame came down on the fact he was ready to excuse it. He was ready to be like, whatever, Jaime, fuck customs. Fuck it, I'm arbitrary. I'll fucking just these are the new rules. I'm Tywin. Everybody knows I shit gold and I own everything, and I'll kill you if you don't like it. That kind of behavior Tywin's exhibited in the past caused this fear that Jaime doesn't want that. Jaime doesn't fucking want all that. All he thinks about is Cersei. Gross. God, it's gross. And so all he thinks about is how can I be with Cersei forever? She shows up at his door as a washerwoman to hide herself. He doesn't care. That gives him a boner. He's about that. He's I'm cool. Whoever you want to be. I'm in love with you, sister. And it's just his slow de-evolution between that kind of Jaime and pushing kids out of windows and not being cool, and slowly being almost a normal human who's not on a redemption arc, because he's not in a redemption arc yet. So shut up. He's not. But he's close to wanting to be on a redemption arc. So that's good, right?
Well, don't you think when he turned back to Harrenhal to save Brienne from the pit, that was a kind of a turning point, or the beginning of a turning point?
That's him thinking about a redemption arc.
Okay, all right, that's fair enough. So you mentioned Cersei and how Cersei malevolently basically wants to emulate Tywin's brutality and strength. And of course, there's a great quote about that at the funeral. Mace Tyrell is speaking. Let me use get my Mace Tyrell. Lord Tywin was a great man, an extraordinary figure, he declared ponderously after he had kissed both her cheeks.
We shall never see his like again, I fear.
You are looking at his like, fool, Cersei thought. It is his daughter standing here before you. But she needed Tyrell and the strength of Highgarden to keep Tommen on his throne, and so all she said was, he will be greatly missed. Pretty good stuff right there.
I love the I love the voice that you did right there.
Well, I did say ponderously. So, I've got Eliana. You've got some notes here about Joffrey and Cersei. It looks like good stuff. I want to let you hit this.
Sure, and I mean, we already touched a lot on Joffrey. He said something that made me think something about Cersei quickly. And
Go for it. No, go for it.
No, it came in, and then I lost it.
Oh, no.
Now I know what it was, because we were talking about it earlier. So first of all, we see how much Cersei idolizes her father. We see how much she idolizes Tywin and actively strives to be like him, even though she differs from him in many ways. And earlier we were talking about and by we I guess me, how that disillusionment that comes with finding out that your parents are human, and obviously that happened for Tywin after this war. For Cersei, it happens upon Tywin's deathbed and finding his corpse, and she's suddenly like, wait, Dad slept with people who weren't just Mom?
I think the exact line was Dad, no.
Yeah. Except it was kind of like that. She's like, Dad, no. She's like, what is this?
She was like, no, I don't see that. That didn't happen.
It's like, this isn't happening. And so, what she does is she just takes all the parts of Tywin that she likes, that she wants to be like, and she very much inherited this superiority complex from him and his ideas of ruling. And we see that as contrast, especially in the Red Keep. I think it's during the Blackwater, where Cersei's talking about how you need to make sure that people fear you, where Sansa's like, I'm not going to make my subjects or my people fear me, I'm going to make them love me, which is a very Ned thing to do. And subconsciously, I think Cersei parents very much like Tywin. All of her children theoretically had Robert, and I mean, I guess they had Jaime too. I mean, they had two dads. This could have been great, But Cersei maneuvered it to be a one-parent household because that's very much what she was familiar with, because that's how Tywin raised her, himself being a single parent. And just like Tywin, Cersei has her own ideas and dreams for what her children will be. Just like Tywin has these ideas of what he thinks his children should be like, and how they're all going to carry on her legacy and bring her power. And this becomes most evident in how she loves Joffrey the most. Not only is he the firstborn child and kind of secures her power, but also she just sees himself in him the most and sees him as an extension of herself. And then you see, in some ways, Cersei kind of being towards Tommen a much milder version of Tywin towards Tyrion, right? She chastises Tommen for being different and for not wanting to do everything that she says.
Yeah, that's true.
But unlike Tywin though, despite, unlike with Tyrion, despite how much Tywin disliked him, Tywin just seems to have never truly trusted Cersei or confided in her, and he never really learns who Cersei is, and Cersei never actually learns to understand who her dad is and how he thinks and how to scheme as he does, because he never actually teaches any of that to any of his children except for Tyrion.
I'm looking at you, Amanda. It's your turn.
It's my turn. Yeah. Tywin, he does teach Tyrion, a few things. Tyrion does learn from his father. His father doesn't always give him the correct lessons, but Tyrion's the one that really seems to exemplify, because they say that the Lannisters are clever from their progenitor, Lan the Clever. And Tyrion, he's taking a lot of the things that he's learned from his father as far as strategy and identifying some of the different things that go on. He's able to have a little bit more insight into the motives of other people. And he's basically given a lot more, I guess, intuition that he seems to be inherited as far as strategy goes from his father. It's just really unfortunate that we have to see that interaction between Tywin and Tyrion, because my heart really breaks every time that he puts his son down a peg. He literally tried to kill him in the battle where he put him in the vanguard with the Valemen at the Vale tribes. He literally tried to kill him, and he tells his son that he wishes that he should have killed him, and he breaks his son down to the point where he murders his own father. He becomes a kinslayer. He becomes one of the worst things, that you could ever become. And it's a kinslayer, and it causes the death of his father. But I mean, he had it coming.
Well, that's exactly what I was talking about when I said Tywin is not a successful parent on any level. Like,
absolutely,
he filled Tyrion so full of rage that he literally shot his own father. I mean, and as we watch Tyrion going forward in the story, that's basically his demon, is that rage and that pain that he's nursing in there. That's, I mean, it's not just being a dwarf and all that stuff. I mean, it's Tywin. And this is something I always point out when we talk about Tyrion Targaryen theory or RLJ and stuff. Like, George is very aware of the fact that it's the person that raises you that's your parent. And Tyrion, being Tywin's true son, has nothing to do with biology or genetics. That's just not how it works. He was raised by Tywin. Tywin will always be his father, just like Ned will always be Jon's father, despite the fact that RLJ, is true or whatever. So, there's that. Now, okay, so guys, we're at 2:10, 2 hours, 10 minutes here, about 2 hours, 5 minutes. We started about 5 minutes late, but I think so. We're just going to go a tiny bit longer. We still have 165 people watching. So thank you, everybody. There's one more thing I want to hit, which is two other parents, and just let you guys get a couple quick words. And one is Doran Martell, and the other one is Balon Greyjoy. And before I do that, I really want to quickly shout out some of the super chats that have come in. I have not been stopping to thank people because I just want to let the conversation go, but we've had some from Stephen Stark, and be patient. I'm just going to scroll up here. There's been about 5 or 6. Yensid, thank you very much, says, let's hear it for dysfunctional families. No good stories without them. That is very true. Wasser 30, Taisha's story too upsetting. Have you heard Moon Meteor yet? Aryan and Quentin, great kids. So yeah, we're going to hit Doran in a second. And we've got, oh, it won't let me go higher. Shoot. We had a couple from, oh gosh, I thanked you guys in the chat. Steph is,
there's
yep.
One, Sandrixian.
Sandrixian hit me with one. So I've been thanking people in the chat, so I have been seeing them. But like I said, yeah, I've been trying to just keep the discussion focused. It's not one of those sort of, well, anyways, you get the point. So let's just finish up with Doran and Balon, and anyone that wants to go first can jump in.
I will parent the shit out of this Doran conversation real quick. I know we're moving through it, so we'll move fast. We got a handful of points. I think a lot about it. I have one tiny mini quote about Arianne from the Winds of Winter sample chapters that is very not contextual. It doesn't give anything away. Judge, Sir LML, may I be excused on it in this conversation?
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, it's really non-spoilery. It just talks about how she feels about Quentin. It doesn't say anything about what's going on. Okay, cool.
Yeah, we're spoilers all. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, good. I didn't know if we were good with that.
I was thinking too hard about it for a second. Now go for it.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad that we got there. We got there together.
Yeah.
So Doran Martell, and since a lot of this has been Ned Stark anchored, I will keep it in similarity to that, the commonalities they faced, because Doran's parenting lacks severely, just like Ned, and especially in telling his kids some stuff, right? Like, he doesn't tell Arianne of the Pact earlier, which has given her a long time to stew and create almost this underhanded, very light animosity that does not and will not go away between her and Quentin, and the betrayal almost she feels that her father wouldn't just tell her the truth. And it helps to lead to enough rivalry for her to possibly command the Dornish swords to join Aegon's team in the Winds of Winter, like whether or not he's really Aegon, whether or not she knows, that young Griff is or is not Aegon. And Doran tells her specifically, if you don't know, don't do it, because this will be bad. The secrets he holds close to his heart, like vengeance for family lost and away from his kids, are really similar in a way, but different to the secrets Ned clutches that bring him down with his family's safety regarding Lyanna and staying safe in the Nord. And the two quotes that I really wanted to share about this, there's a quote from the Queensmaker in A Feast for Crows, where she says, "That is Nymeria's star, burning bright, and that milky band behind her, those are 10,000 ships. She burned as bright as any man, and so shall I. You will not rob me of my birthright." And that is before she knew the pact between Quentyn and Daenerys and her and Viserys. And then, of course, there's a quote in The Winds of Winter in Arya's first chapter that is, "She had resented Quentyn for all those years that she had thought their father meant to name him as his heir in place of her, but that had turned out just to be a misunderstanding. She was the heir to Dorne. She had her father's word on that. Quentyn would have his dragon queen, Daenerys." So Arianne keeps a lot of this Quentyn stuff. She says, oh yeah, I'm cool. It's cool. But there might be some rash decision-making around whether or not it's cool coming up. And that's an example of Doran just withholding this information like Ned did, Yeah,
great. That's great points. You can sort of understand why Doran keeps things a secret in certain circumstances. Obviously things get out, not much stays a secret, but it seems like he should have trusted Arianne and Quentyn to know, because they're basically his right and left hand, and they literally did not know what each other was doing. So that ended up biting him in the ass for sure. Steph is with another super chat. Thanks, Steph is. Go ahead, Eliana.
Just to move things forward, I'm also going to touch on how Doran and Quentyn's relationship was, in that honestly we don't really see it. We see Arianne and Doran interacting a couple of times,
and you can see the footprints though on Quentyn, right?
Yeah, and I think it's strange, right? Because Quentyn thinks so much of this is what's going to make my father happy. He wants so much to bring his family honor and to live up to whatever his father's expectations are for him. He wants to help his father fulfill his father's plans and schemes, whereas, of course, Arianne, on the other hand, she's subverting. She's like, I have my own plans. Sorry, Dad. But Quentyn's trying to be that dutiful son, yet that's not the parent that we should be hearing about his relationship with, right? Because Quentyn was raised by his mother across the narrow sea. Wasn't he? No?
The Ironwoods.
Oh, with Ironwoods. Okay. I just had assumed that he had a better relationship with his mother, and I don't know. Doran, also a single dad.
Yeah, he did have a good relationship with his mother. When Oberyn Martell had the tryst with I don't know if it was the wife or girlfriend of, or the paramour of the Lord Ironwood, they had a duel and he killed, it's rumored that he poisoned Lord Ironwood. And so because of that, Doran has to give up one of his children. And there's this huge fight because his wife, and I think she's from Norvos, I think it is.
Yeah.
They don't believe in fostering. They don't believe in giving up your child. And she fought for her son. And she put her foot down and she said, you either do this or I'm leaving. And he went against that. He sent his child away. He sent their child away. And that's why she went back to Norvos. But she was obviously very bonded to her son and fought very ferociously for him. And that's what caused at the end of their marriage. But yeah, so.
But divorce, we don't have very many of those in Song of Ice and Fire. And I think that that's something that, we don't see that explored either in which I think is interesting, because in modern stories, you have a lot of characters, nowadays, who are affected by, mom and dad split up, which I think is something that definitely affects people, yet this isn't on the minds of Arianne or Quentin at all.
Yeah, so it raises an interesting point. There isn't a lot of divorce, however, there is a lot of single parenting, and it is something that George seems to have thought a little bit about. And I know that Amanda made some notes about this, so why don't you take that, Amanda?
Yeah, so we were looking at first of all, single mothers, and it's not laid out very specifically where we're seeing these, quintessential single mothers, but it does happen. The one that I did pick out was Alysanne Mormont, who says that the father is a bear and that she became a bear, but she's unwedded and she does have these children. And you see it discussed, whenever we see discussion about her, that part of her is usually discussed. But one thing that does happen with single mothers is when the father dies, we do have a lot of widows. When that father dies, that woman by default becomes a single mother. When Ned dies, she in turn does become a single mother. She now is both mom and dad, and she has to kind of take on that role. And she does that, like when we were talking about when she becomes, his advisor and she's guiding him, she's giving him some of the advice that, maybe Ned might have given him. So she's having to fill both shoes. And it's something that can be very, very overwhelming when you're thrust into that role. You're not used to that role. And all of a sudden you become both mom and you're also dad. And it also happens whenever a man goes kind of leaves his wife and goes off to war. We see that happen quite frequently. Ned actually impregnates Catelyn and then goes off to war. And the wars can last years. Wars can last a very, very long time. And by the time that Ned actually comes home, she's already got a newborn. She's got a baby. She's been taking care of that baby, and she's been nurturing that baby, and she's been filling that role. And so by the time that Ned is actually, coming back, he doesn't even see his wife pregnant. The next thing he knows, he's got, a crying baby in his arms. And during that time that, each woman that's being left by their husband has to take on that role. And it can be very overwhelming. And there, it's a lot to take on for any parent, mother or father.
And you're speaking from experience here, aren't you, Amanda?
Yes, I'm definitely speaking from experience. So my husband went off. My husband did he did a Ned to me. So he impregnated. I was impregnated, and my husband went off to war. Yeah. And by the time that he came back, he had a bundle of joy, and he did that for both children. So he never had to be there when I was huge and fat and as big as a house and waddling everywhere and going to the bathroom every 5 minutes and crying, every 5 minutes, sometimes going to the bathroom and crying every 5 minutes. But you're having to take on both of those responsibilities. There was a time when I had a toddler in diapers and a baby in diapers, and I was doing it, all by myself. And there's a real sense of abandonment. There's a sense of just overwhelmed. There's, a real sense of being overwhelmed with everything. And it's a lot to take on for any parent, man or woman. But it's something that's kind of the nature of the beast. When war happens, one of those parents has to leave, and you have to fill both shoes. You have to become dad, and you also become mom. So
I've got a cousin, same deal, has several kids, and her husband did multiple tours, and that's why people always say that the family serves too, when a guy goes to war. So yeah, that's a really great bit of real life experience there to lend. And I see a couple people in the chat relating to, of course, Amanda, Laura D, and a couple other people dealt with that same issue. And so it's, when you're a writer, you really, your story is better when you include everything from real life. You have to include every kind of life experience, as many different philosophies as possible. The more you include, it's kind of like your readers feel like, okay, he sees me. The fact that George takes a moment to think about what military parents like Kat's in Kat's situation feel like, it makes you, Amanda, or Laura in the chat really empathize with the character because it's something they can relate to. So this is what I keep harping on with this talk is like, make your characters relatable. Well, how do you do that? You fashion them like real people in as many ways as possible. So that's probably a good place to wrap it up. We are at 2 hours and change here. We've got 173 people watching us still. So thank you, everybody, so much for coming out. And thank you to all my guests for filling the air with such wise words. We've been holding everyone's attention. This went off just like I thought it would, only better. Somebody might flip onto this and go, oh, LML had a bunch of girls on. He's trying to be politically correct or something. Well, the truth is, these are just 3 of the smartest people in the fandom that I know. And when I think about topics, I think about what people are good at. And as you can see, all 3 of these ladies know a lot about psychology and they understand what makes people tick. I've read their writings and I know that to be the case. And that's why I had them on here. And I didn't even have to say all that much today because, well, you see what happens. So thank you so much. I'll give you each a turn to add the plugs, talk about what you just did or what you're doing now. But I just want to say thank you to all 3 of you. You did so well. So Amanda, go ahead, go first.
Thank you, David, and thank you for having me on. It was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it. My name's Amanda. I go by Crowfood's daughter. You can find me on my YouTube channel at The Disputed Plans. If you're interested in Ironborn stuff, that's one of the things that I focus on. I just did a video on the Grey King. I write a lot about the Grey King and Ironborn culture. So if you're interested in that, be sure to check it out. You can also find me on Twitter at Crowfood_SD. And thanks for having me.
Go ahead, and either one of you.
Oh,
Chloe.
Hi. So if you've been watching, I'm Chloe. I am one half of the podcast Girls Gone Canon, where we're doing a Song of Ice and Fire point of view reread. We're doing by character, not by chapter, not by book. We're doing by character chapter. You can also find me, a side project I do is Drunk, A Song of Ice and Fire History. We're on YouTube. We're on Podbean. We have a new episode coming out in a couple weeks. I've kind of been taking a little break from it, giving more to Girls Gone Canon. So we have The Sworn Sword, which is an episode of our Drunken Egg series coming up. That was with Joe Buckley from Tower of the Hand. He's great. He was real fun on that. So I'm finally finishing that up for the next couple weeks. And other than that, you can find me on Twitter at Lies and Arbor or on Tumblr where I post meta-analysis as Lies and Arbor.
Well, I'm just saying I'm fired up for the Barristan. It's looking good so far.
Yes.
Enjoyed the intro episode. Eliana.
We still need a catchphrase, so you got to figure that out. But
I have it for you. It's
okay.
What was it? Give me a second. I'll think of it. I thought of it a second.
Is
Go
that
ahead.
it? Is that the catchphrase? Because like
No.
Barristan's older.
My
Is that the
grandpa?
catchphrase? Yeah. Oh, hold
No.
on. Give me a second. Let me think about it. I'm gonna wait for what you've got, I guess. Eventually.
No, do your plug, and I'll think of it here.
Okay. So I'm Eliana, the other half of Girls Gone Canon, where yes, we are doing a character read through, and I also am a host on the Maester Monthly podcast because this is a podcast that talks about the things that are going on in the Song of Ice and Fire subreddit. You know, great stuff that people are putting out because ultimately, like the reason why we're all in this cast is because we're all part of a large A Song of Ice and Fire community. You're all there participating in it. If you're listening to this or if you're like typing and saying things. And we just want to highlight some of the great stuff that people are talking about. So check that out. Check out the actual subreddit. See what people are saying. Partake. Spit some hot takes. That's it.
And of course, since you mentioned Maester Monthly, we'll also mention Joe Magician's YouTube channel. Of course, Joe Magician's on Maester Monthly. Good friend of everyone here. And his YouTube channel is off to a great start. So check out the Joe Magician YouTube channel. I just had a little Anissa Cocker super chat fly in there at the end. Thank you very much. So thanks everyone in the chat. There's been lots of good interaction. Clearly, this is a topic that got everyone fired up. So awesome. People are asking for a part 2. I don't know if we'll do a part 2 on parenting specifically. However, I definitely will have all of these fine folks back on Between Two Weirwoods in the future. I've got a kind of a backlog of people that I owe a return favor to. So I'm going to do as many of these as I can in between my scripted episodes, and I will get everyone through, and then I'll start getting people back on the second round with different combinations of people and different topics. So keep tuning into Between Two Weirwoods, which will be on Sundays like this. I'm going to keep it at the same time once or twice a month. And yes, that's it. Thanks, everyone. It's been lovely, and I'll see you again soon. Adios.